Good evening. Welcome to Ufos Chat. This is a new thing that we're doing, and so we're just going to do it without any kind of script or segments or anything like that for this first time around. And we're just going to have a casual chat about the last episode of the show. Welcome um, and thank you for joining us. Thank you for watching.
Here, sorry guys, I might have had a second sound going that was causing an echo. I think I fixed it there, but
okay.
Thank you for coming, guys. Yes, bear with us. This is our first discussion show, so we haven't really done this before. All right.
Oh, I
Dorothy,
hear a doggy. And Dorothy wants to say hi.
To everyone there.
So, let's begin. I know. Well, I guess, yeah, let's talk about the Jan Volsky case. I know that you had other things you wanted to say about that, Jeff.
Did I?
You said you did.
I mean, yeah, I had mentioned there's just other kind of weird details about the case. I kind of hope maybe somebody had some questions, but it doesn't look like we have anyone in the chat. I don't. Did you have an opportunity to look at any live chat last time? Anyone have any questions? No.
I didn't see any questions in the live chat from the last episode. No, but
there was a question. Let me just real quick here. Somebody had mentioned on Facebook or on Twitter when I originally posted this case, and in one of these slides here, they mention the townspeople supposedly saw, or the TV crew that came there supposedly saw these little green men in the forest kind of like run off when they were there doing the filming. And somebody had asked me if that was actually like a part of the case, like did that really happen? And I can't confirm that it did actually ever happen. I found no mention of that anywhere except for this comic. So I don't know if that was a recreation for the comic, a piece of fiction that they've added to it, or if that was something that's in the books that like I don't have because they're in Polish and it's kind of hard to get a hold of. So that's one question I had about that, that somebody had about that I cannot confirm that actually happened. But
so that's not a photograph then?
No, it's not. It's not a photograph.
No.
It's very photoreal, I know, but it's
a little
the comic
binocular circulars things.
Yes.
I don't even know what those are called.
Yeah. So it's but yeah, it's I was thinking a lot about Louise, and he showed that picture of those frogmen, and like it really does look a lot like those kind of guys, that are wearing those kind of like scuba or whatever kind of gear, messing around in the waters and swamps and stuff. And as the question is like, okay, so if it was just a military exercise of some kind, how does that explain Volsky's experience, where he supposedly went in this craft, and met these creatures and talked to them and all that kind of stuff? Like, so is it just that he, was he drugged or hallucinated as part of some sort of, like, as people suggested, some plot, some scheme? Or is it that he really did have some sort of experience, like some people have a UFO sighting that's really actually pretty mundane. It's like Venus, and then just over the in his mind he let it build up into more, like, or maybe he saw something out in the forest and people walking around, but he actually was just tired, went home and went to bed. We know when he went home, they said he passed out like a log and they couldn't wake him up for hours. He was just out of it. So maybe he saw something mundane, went home, went to bed, integrated that into a more kind of fantastical situation in a dream, and then that turned into the story that we have today. The problem with some of these cases is it's like one thing might explain one aspect of it, but then how do you explain the rest of it? If it is just a misidentification of, say, a militia operation, how do you explain him supposedly talking to, interacting with, going in the craft, all this other stuff, which isn't just a simple distant misidentification. So that's why these stories are so like kind of confusing and rarely make any sense. Like it's kind of hard to come up with an explanation for.
Here are some of my notes that I made on your piece, Jeff. I found it interesting that the people offered him food and he refused the food.
Yeah.
After the examination, or I assume this was after the examination.
It depends. Again, that's another piece of conflicting information. Some reports say it happened after the examination as he was kind of getting dressed. Other reports say it was actually while like two of the beings were examining him that some of the other beings started to bust out the food and start to eat it at the same time. So again, it depends on the source that you have. And if you really want to get an idea of how crazy the differences are, go read there was a thing originally published by this Warsaw UFO like popularization group that kind of goes over a lot of the different details of the case. And I posted this on my thread as well. It's kind of really, really bad English, but what they did is like they have a bunch of different sources and then they list the different details on which source said that detail. And you can kind of get an idea of like all the conflicting details like between all the different sources of this. But I later found out that article was later reprinted in Flying Saucer Review of Close Encounter with Green-Faced Creatures in Poland, 1978. And again, that's linked to in my thread, where they did a bit better of a translation. And again, they describe all the different details with diagrams and stuff, and point out the different sources that said different things. So it's really interesting. It's a good idea to get to look at and see how details can differ so greatly depending on sources. Even in a case like this where there was only one witness, like there shouldn't be that many conflicting details. There wasn't even that many investigators, but it seems almost every source gets details differently. And that was one of them.
That's really interesting.
But I'm sorry, was there something specific about the food you wanted to know about?
No, I just wanted to make the observation that the food was there, that there was food, and that was interesting, and it kind of dovetails a little bit with like fairy folklore and other folklore where food plays an important role. Where he refused to eat the food, and kind of makes me wonder how the story would have been different had he eaten the food,
That's what surprised me, that it wasn't in Cutchin's book, Trojans of Feasts or whatever, about the food that is fed to things. Like I looked in that book and there was no mention of this case in there. But it's a very weird kind of food, right? Like they said, it looked like an icicle, like that would, like hang off a ceiling, or a gutter, in the winter. But that it wasn't like hard. He said it was like, it broke up like cake. And so while it looked like a piece of an icicle, it just broke up softly like cake and they ate it. It's very strange. So.
Yeah, the other thing that stuck out to me was that the children in the town were reportedly really scared because they had to walk to school, and I found that to be a really fascinating detail as well, because kind of resembles stories about monsters and fairies and stuff like that again.
Yeah. Like I said, it was about 2 kilometers they had to kind of walk to get to the school, because this was a small village in Poland. Like you pretty much had to walk everywhere, and they were scared, and so that's why they had that. I guess that one of the teachers was a physics teacher or something, and he tried to teach them those classes on space sciences. Like he discussed the Soviet space program and all the recent developments going on with that. Talked about whether or not there is life in the universe and how it's possible, but nobody's discovered it. And then just generally just try to teach them kind of general critical thinking skills, but that headmaster said it didn't work. They still had upset students. They still had some students skipping class, and they had enough of that. And he called the local militia commander or whatever and said, "Hey, get out here, investigate the case. Hopefully, you can explain it, hopefully thinking it's just going to be some Soviet helicopter or something, and they can give the explanation and it'll all be over with." But they came out and investigated and couldn't find that it was a helicopter of any kind, but just determined that the guy basically was dreaming. So, which again, it shares a lot of similarities like that with, like, say, the Joe Pancake case, as far as like encountering these small entities and these outfits being offered, food, they not being able to talk to them, communicating with gestures. That it's been explained kind of like as this waking dream that he kind of had, and both cases also interestingly happened kind of in the morning. The Memmelchine case happened, 7-ish to 8-ish in the morning. The Joe Simon case, I believe, happened around 11 in the morning-ish, somewhere around there. But so these are early morning cases. Like, they're not your nighttime kind of like abduction kind of like cases, and then technically they're not really abductions. They share more in common perhaps with a contactee kind of case than perhaps an abduction, because it's really just like an encounter where they have some form of limited communication through gestures and an exchange of food and go on your way kind of deal.
Right. It's not like he had to recover his memory or something. It
Yeah.
was just something that he reported.
Yeah.
And you said, and he also said that he went to try to get people to go and view the craft, right? Like
Yeah.
that were nearby.
Yeah, when he got home, the idea was that he would tell his family, and that they would, like his sons and whoever, because he lived with, I believe it was two adult sons. Like, they weren't kids, like they were grown adults, and I showed a picture of them in like one of the presentation. And he went and told them, and like I said, again, conflicting information. Some sources say he then went with his sons back out to the field. That's what the comic says. That's not what really any of the rest of the sources say. They say he basically passed out and was dead to the world for a couple of hours at the house while all this other stuff was going on. But he came home, told his wife and his sons. His sons called one of the local neighbors and some of the other village people, and then they went out there to investigate it. So it's, but the main scene, again, like that's not a real photo. That's a cartoon comic there. But that is a real photo to the right? Like, you might think that happened right after the event. Like, no, that's when the TV crew came, later that month. So it wasn't immediately after. I'm not entirely sure how many village people really did show up immediately after the event, like that day. There's some reports that said, like, at least immediately after the event. I don't know if that's over the next couple of days or whatever, or they mean the next couple of weeks. Not clear. There's like literally busloads, like up to 14 busloads of people just like coming, going, and tromping all over the place and investigating the site. So it's, a lot of people did check it out. And it did start to, it didn't get publicity though in the newspapers until I believe June 6th or July 6th. I'd have to check. But so it was about a month, at least a month before from when it happened to when then it started to get published in those newspapers and stuff around the country.
Did the witness allude to the possibility that they were ETs? But I think you said that he hadn't even heard of that term, right?
Yeah, he supposedly had never even heard of that term. He didn't know what they were, and he never thought that they were ETs. He said they were foreigners, and I said most of the literature you read, he says he thought they were foreigners, perhaps painted with, like, this skin was painted green, or perhaps they had masks on.
Could that have been like a assimilation or sublimation of Polish lore about vampires, demons, all that sort of stuff?
That's something that I was thinking about. I don't,
I'm not too familiar with Polish lore. I'd have to do some more studying about that. But
and maybe there's an anti-Soviet kind of message as well. Like if he's describing them as foreigners, maybe he's using that as a kind of way to maybe subconsciously protest the Soviet, presence in his country.
Yeah. I mean, it's also interesting how they're regularly described as, when they're described as foreigners, it's almost always as like Oriental, they call them, like they say they're Oriental-like, because, and I think it's usually because there's kind of like stereotyped idea of like slanted eyes, like going to the back of the head and all this other stuff.
Yeah,
Like,
because a lot of countries in Eastern Europe that came under Soviet occupation, I mean, the Soviet Union was sort of seen as an Asian country by many, not as a really European country.
yeah,
Yeah.
Siberia, people in Siberia look more Asian than they do Russian. Like, so
Yeah, the whole Oriental thing in Close Encounter reports is really interesting to me, because I think there's something, and Timothy Brigham was talking about this a little bit in the chat too. There's probably something unconscious going on there, having to do with
Oriental,
20th century Western conceptions of the exotic, and of, basically like portraying aliens as these exotic beings, but only insofar as they're like, they resemble people from other parts of the world. And also, but I mean, this goes, I think, even back to like airship stuff too, because in like airship stories, a lot of the times the villain would
Chinese
be
language
Chinese.
papers. Yeah.
Yeah.
They would find papers dropped from airships that they said, look, I had Chinese characters on them, or something, foreign characters like that. Yeah.
Yeah. And there's some of the old adventure serials. There is, I'm trying to remember what it was specifically. Now it's escaping me, but I'm pretty sure that there were adventure serials that featured Asian villains in airships. There's definitely a cartoon that had that later on, but I think
Fu Manchu kind of like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And the West has always kind of appealed to like, the exotic, esoteric nature of Asia, like, the ancient wisdom of the Oriental people to like prop up their beliefs and ideas and all that kind of stuff. Like, yeah, it's I think it's definitely more, I think, at the time, like, I don't know, I don't see people these days describing occupants with that kind of language as often. Like, they don't describe them as like Chinese people or like Oriental people or
but yeah, it used to be common, and like even John Peel was doing it in the Mothman prophecies. I remember describing Men in Black as being resembling Asians.
Yeah.
By the way, there was a Polish cosmonaut who launched in 1978, but this was about a month after the Milchan so-called abduction. So I'm wondering, like, if maybe his son brought a newspaper or something with an announcement, he might have assimilated that. But then again, like, he wasn't describing them as coming from space, so that's doubtful.
Yeah, it's. I mean, as far as like his exposure to like media and stuff, like I mentioned, they said really his only exposure was when his sons would sometimes bring home a newspaper and leave it like kind of out on the table or whatever, and then he would see that, because they didn't have a television, and there's supposedly only like 2 televisions in this village, and so I still think, perhaps it's just like, because I grew up in a media-rich environment, it's hard for me to see, even though I understand in the Soviet Union they wouldn't have had access to all the kind of media people in the West would. It still seems hard for me to believe they're as isolated as they sometimes make these people seem. Like, I think people have a tendency to play up the kind of the primitive farmer had an encounter kind of experience, because that adds credibility to it. Like, hey, this guy is just a dumb farmer. How would he make this stuff up? Like, and and while he wasn't supposedly like that formally educated, besides for like some schooling when he was a kid, I still think he had to have at least been aware of some stuff that was going on, like with the Soviet Union, with the space program. I mean, like you'd have to be hiding under a rock not to be aware of that stuff was going on in the world, like even in a village. And he did not just stay in that village, right? Like that morning he was literally coming back from a more major city, like he was in Dubrawa, and he goes over to Lublin and Opolubelsky all the time, like, because it's really just a small commune in between these more larger cities or towns that he would travel to all the time. So it's not like he like was out in the boondocks and never saw like the news or never heard of anything, like. But yeah, it's hard to say. And then there's also the story that supposedly that one of his sons was actually friends with that researcher Witold Bozanek. And if that's the case, if his son was in fact friends with the UFO researcher, it would seem hard to believe that he hadn't heard of it. Particularly if his sons live with them, right? It's not like they just come in to visit every once in a while. They may not talk about their friend. Like they live at the same house with him, and it's in the house. It's basically like it's almost like a barn. Basically, it's like a small kind of like shacky kind of house. So it's hard but again, with this case, in many cases, everyone's dead, so we can't really go back and ask any further questions. We can just kind of look at what we got.
I just asked ChatGPT whether there were any Soviet biological or chemical weapons tests conducted in Poland. It says yes, there were, but these are most of what's known basically is very little. So,
as far as that goes, if you recall, one of the stories they told was that supposedly part of this vegetation was like damaged and like stuff wouldn't grow properly in that area for like many years. Like if there was some sort of exposure to some sort of chemical agent, like that could have caused damage. But as I pointed out in the show, there's also people that talk about how the whole area was so overrun with vegetation, it was kind of hard to get to. Now, I don't know if it's just like there's a specific area that didn't grow very well, but the general meadow kind of got overrun.
This is really interesting.
Something that could have made him sort of hallucinate on the day.
Yeah, I'm just saying, like, if there was some sort of like chemical agent that was used or tested out there, like that could have made him hallucinate, maybe it could have also damaged the ground, and
yeah,
who knows?
Yeah, another thing that I was thinking is maybe, you were saying that the different versions of the report are really contradictory. I'm wondering if that could just be because he told really inconsistent versions of what happened. Not necessarily that he was lying, but that he just didn't, like, maybe the event was not like, or his experience of the event was not actually very coherent. Maybe it was actually it had like a dreamlike component to it or something like that. And that's why he was so inconsistent in his retelling. I don't know. It's speculation, but.
Well, it's kind of like any kind of like with folkloric like narratives, like, and if you recall the presentation I kind of gave on how the experience of sightings and the different steps they go through, is like people go through a process where they kind of like they modify their story, like they slim it down, eliminating things that they don't feel are absolutely necessary. They perhaps exaggerate other areas that they think makes a better point, or and
they reconstruct the memory. They reconstruct
and every time they do this, it's a constant process of reconstructing, and it's also being changed by the cultural influences. Like once you start to tell your story and you're interacting with like reporters and UFO investigators, and then they're sharing information back to you about stuff, like about other cases, like, and this is similar to this, and like, even if you don't mean to, that stuff is in your brain and it starts to get like reinterpreted, and you start to like your story changes kind of like over time. But
Yeah, especially if you have people feeding you suggestions too, like UFO investigators.
And it's like I said back then, it's not that people are like I said, it's not that they're lying, like they're not intentionally
Mhm.
being deceptive. It's just that story changes in their mind over time, as they process it repeatedly and reintegrate new information that comes in, and yeah,
Yeah.
it's interesting.
So, yeah. One other observation I had was just that, there were rooks in the story, which, and they were immobilized. They were like they were stunned or something. They were still alive but unable to.
Yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, it was really weird detail, and
Like
but
it's just like supposedly an effect of maybe the craft attracts the birds to it, like because there's birds that are attracted to various electromagnetic like waves, like they'll fly into buildings and stuff because they get attracted to certain things. Like, is it that they were just paralyzed by something from the craft, or like it's totally like it wasn't planned, like the aliens didn't actually want these birds for some reason, or these entities didn't want these birds for some reason, like, or why were the birds there? It's just weird. They didn't seem to like have any purpose.
maybe it's because the aliens or entities, they saw these intelligent birds, and they wanted to take samples home with them or something to study their little corvid brains.
Maybe there's the smart birds. I just read an article today from a Seattle paper about crows stuff, and how like they may form deeper connections with people than like we even think. Like people know that they'll adjust their behaviors to like get fed by people. Like they basically talked about like there's different types of like crow people. There's like crow feeders, there's like crow friends, like, and there's like crow, I forget what the other one is, but and there's some people that they'll just modify their behaviors just to get food out of people, but there's other people that really form supposedly deeper bonds with these wild crows. Like they almost are like friends, like, and like they come to meet each other, and it's more than just like handing food out when they go. And I guess they've been doing studies up in Seattle where they put on these masks, these fake kind of like masks,
Yeah,
to study how crows recognize faces and people. Uh, and these people go out there and stand with these fake masks and a sign that basically says, "This isn't that weird, guys. Call this number if you have any questions to why we're standing here looking like weirdos."
This isn't that weird. I don't know about that.
Yeah, but it's interesting. Crows are smart. Like they have memories too. Like there's some crows near my friend's house, and those guys can be devious. Like they'll remember shit and hold it against you. I swear they'll hold it against you.
But they don't fall for the avians and cosplay.
No.
Yeah.
Well,
still
that's why these entities had to like paralyze these crows, because the crows were on to these guys. They could see through their game,
Yeah, they could see through. They're like, that's just green skin paint. We know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also mentioned in the chat about the children of Walpit, which is an interesting. There's some interesting parallels there. I mean, mostly short entities with green skin, I think. But
Yeah, I was wondering what's the deal with the green skin? Like, why green? Does it relate to, I don't know, snakes, reptiles, something? Like, I mean, why do people see this green skin? Like, so assuming they're not real, this is just how people are seeing things. Like, why would they interpret these things as these green skin kind of like beings?
yeah, well, the Children of Woolpit is really kind of a weird outlying story, I feel like, too.
Yeah.
Like, I don't think there are a lot of reports like that. It's pretty old. Like, it's from
There's the Green
like
Man,
14th century or something like that, like late Middle Ages.
Yeah, when was that? Like the 1500s or something? Or
Yeah, I don't remember,
but
yeah, like it's an actual historical report, though, right? So it could have happened. And like one theory that I remember reading one time is that these kids were, malnourished or something like that, or and then like the green was like sort of exaggerated or something like that. I don't remember.
Oh, it's way older than that. It's 12th century.
Yeah, okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. There was a paper I posted on Twitter that kind of talked about the green children of Wool Pit and extraterrestrials and demonology. It was an academic paper. I'd have to find it, but discuss that. Yep.
Okay. So I guess let's move on to Luis's piece. We can talk about that.
Yep.
Jeff and I, prior to the show, we both read a chapter from Alien Worlds by Jacques Vallée, which is called Consciousness. What was it called? Consciousness, Culture, and UFOs.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, by Jacques Vallée. And that book you can find on Internet Archive, and they also have Audible has an audiobook version. I actually listened to the Audible version twice today and yesterday. And he, like Louise mentioned, Jacques Vallée talks about consciousness and UFOs quite a bit, and he has for like a quite a long time. He gave a lecture in 2007 at the IRVA conference, the International Remote Viewing Association, called "The Software of Consciousness," where he kind of talks about mostly like Stargate and the remote viewing program, but also kind of integrates it into like UFOs as well. And he talked about it on Jeffrey Mishlov's Thinking Aloud program, I believe back in the 80s. And he was again on more recent years in his more recent program, the new Thinking Aloud. I tried to find that IRVA lecture online, but I couldn't find it online. But he did give a lecture of the same title a couple of years ago in 2018, I believe, at the Parapsychological Association, where he famously quit ufology again. Vallée likes to quit UFOs every once in a while. It never seems to go anywhere. So you can find that lecture online where he talks about that. But yeah, it was an interesting paper. But and he makes a lot of good points in it. But just in the general sense, like that, I think really hold up now post 2017. Where he talks a lot about how nobody's really doing. There's all this money, in UFOs now, and these people coming into it, and political pressure. And keep in mind, this was written in at least 2007. This wasn't even written recently. But despite all of this, nobody's actually studying UFOs. Like they're not actually thinking about how to like scientifically study the problem and doing any real research. Like it's all kind of like activism and politics, and everyone's already decided ahead of time, that it's aliens, and so why even bother kind of like doing research, And there's one segment here I just wanted to read real fast here that he's talking about like what kind of maybe Rachel can talk about something where I find what I was looking for.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I thought that I think it's towards the end of the chapter what you're looking for. It's like at the last page of the chapter, or right before the last page. Yeah, I think it's. I did like those points that he made, and I agree with that. But overall, I didn't find the chapter to be like something I really agreed with, because he talked a lot about Jungian archetypes. You know, he relied on, you know, people like Joseph Campbell. Well, he didn't really rely on Joseph Campbell, but was more critical of him for like being like, hey, why doesn't Joseph Campbell talk about UFOs, you know? And also Mircea Eliade, you know, and so it's like he's not really approaching religion and spirituality from a scientific perspective, at least not with the sources that he's using. And this idea that, you know, archetypes are this sort of mysterious, magical thing that, you know, like requires something, you know,
Definitely.
you know, beyond, you know, that's, he used the word interpersonal in there and stuff like that. I think he really relies on a lot of very pseudoscientific sources, but I also think that his argument, you know, is essentially, you know, it's not parsimonious. I think that the same issue I had with Wonders in the Sky, or similar issues I had to Wonders in the Sky, I found in this piece, where he's basically saying like, you know, that 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 archetypes, you know, and UFOs being related to archetypes, and even these other spiritual reports of strange things happening, strange entities, or like travel through the sky in antiquity, like that these somehow require some sort of, you know, consciousness transcending the human body or something. It doesn't really require any of that stuff, you know. Like when you think about it, it's like we live in a world where we're all human beings, we're all people with minds that work in similar ways, and we're all exposed to things like the sky and stars and shooting stars, and we're all exposed to things like animals and people who are strange, you know, or strange to us, you know, right? So it seems like we don't really need to rely on you know, Jungian archetypes, right? I mean, I think maybe archetypes like in a different sense from how Jung was talking about them, maybe. But he also uses kind of vague language too, you know, I think. Those are my...
Valet also kind of throws a lot of ideas at the wall. So like in his book Deceptions, is that what it's called?
Messengers of Deception.
Yeah, Messengers of Deception.
Yeah.
He alludes to like the idea that there could be some sort of group which is like staging UFO events, but then he kind of, it's hard to sometimes tell like where that leaves off from his idea of interdimensional beings doing the same. And it's just hard to tell like sometimes what exactly he's advocating and what he's just throwing out there as an idea.
Yeah, and like I find it really weird that he would say, like, for example, I mean, this was in 2007, so it was kind of a different era, I guess, for UFO research, but you know, like saying, well, some UFOs and some like ancient reports of celestial marvels, you know, they have real physical stimuli, you know, but right, like if they're real stimuli that are things like meteors, you know, like that doesn't really support his hypothesis in any way. You know what I mean? Like, so I don't know.
Yeah,
I have trouble with Valet.
well, see, the thing I have with Valet for me is that, like, I totally agree. Like, I think he can say some interesting, like, valid things, but only if you take them completely out of his context. Because why he's saying them is completely backwards. So if you take stuff he says out of context, it makes sense, like, but not for the reasons he would have you believe, like he's saying them, right? So when he talks about, like, you know, powerful people, like in society taking advantage of the phenomenon and manipulating people and stuff, like yeah, I absolutely believe that's true. It's just not people like doing magic, like, you know, manipulating extra dimensions with other entities, like manipulating us, you know, Like, no, it's just people exploiting the topic for political and social purposes, like completely human activity. Like, there's nothing magical about it. Like, or he'll say, like, I found what he's gonna say, like, this makes total sense, right? Where he says, the sadness comes from my observation in the middle of all this passion, and despite all the money being spent on ufology, what little real research is being done on being grinded to a stop everywhere in the world. That is easy to understand. Why should any scientist take the trouble to go out on the limb, go into the field for long and tedious hours of investigation if the answer is waiting for us in the archives of some comfortable government office or inside Area 51 or on some old film of alien autopsies? I see no credible ongoing efforts to come to grips with the underlying UFO phenomenon, which he believes is real, important, and blah, 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 tied to consciousness. So he gets off into the woo there. But yeah, so he says some good, interesting things. It's just rarely for like the reasons like he's getting to. And I agree with everything you said. Like, I don't think there needs to be something either breaking in from a different dimension or this control system, right? That's like making us, like back then, making us see angels. Like in the 1900s, it was making us see airships. Now we're seeing whatever, flying saucers and triangles. And it's not some outside entity that's causing this stuff and manipulating us like externally. It's just our brain and how we work and how we interpret things using concepts that we're familiar with from our time period, and our various other cultural influences that have affected us as we've grown up. There doesn't need to be some external factor like causing this manipulation. But in a way, you can see why he kind of has to come up with this idea. And I think it's fairly parts of his control system theory is sort of similar to Jose Cuervaca. I don't know if that's how you pronounce his name. Distortion kind of like theory, right? Where like one of the reasons why these entity encounters, and Jack Flay also wrote a paper on the reasons why he doesn't think it's extraterrestrial. And some of these reasons are like these encounters are kind of ridiculous, right? They make no sense, right? Like an abduction. Why would they need to come here and perform these crude biological genetic experiments if they were truly advanced extraterrestrials? Like why are they doing medical stuff that's primitive even for us? Like why are they stopping by to borrow a jug of water and give a guy a piece of buckwheat pancake? Like all this stuff that like makes no freaking sense. And so the idea is that that's because that's really little more than like a screen memory or a memory personally constructed for you, even by you, using your own, internally generated concepts, but being influenced by an external entity that's causing you to have this experience. So the experience is real, but that might not have actually been a real physical saucer in your driveway. That might just been something put into your brain in the form of like this memory. And that's why these things make no sense, because really they didn't actually happen that way. It's really just a collection, a distortion of reality, integrating, a personal experience generated for that individual. But again, all that,
it's less parsimonious than saying that that you created that screen memory yourself. Like,
to be honest, it's even weirder than there just being an alien coming down and borrowing some water, in my opinion, that there's some sort of like extra dimensional force that's manipulating our reality and giving us these experiences. Like there's I don't even know how you would prove that. It's just kind of speculation. Like,
yeah, I mean, like you could use the same explanation for pretty much any experience. Like it could just be a completely mundane experience, like, and you'd have just as much evidence supporting it.
Yeah. So it's
he also thinks that the CIA was staging alien abductions in Latin America during the Cold War using microwave energy. He's got this big thing about microwave energy as like a mechanism for inducing hallucinations or manipulating perception.
Did that involve that one guy that was like they thought maybe the Antonio Villaboas case was like a CIA kind of like a fake abduction?
I think so. Yeah.
One doctor guy. doctor something or other. Like there was some guy that they said was involved in these, like and the CIA was doing them, and
I wouldn't put it past him.
Yeah, I mean, I think
my
that
lab thing, my labs.
yeah, I could just about believe that like the CIA or some of the military junta regimes in Latin America may have staged or used UFOs as like a cover for like torture or counterinsurgency, but like there's just no proof for that.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'm just saying it's plausible. You know, like I could totally see the CIA doing something like that. They've done things like that before in other contexts.
That's the thing. There's lots of things that are plausible, like even probably more plausible than other things, but like you just can't prove them, you know, like
Yeah.
like with the Volsky case, it's plausible he could have been hypnotized by someone and fed this whole experience. I mean, that's not like impossible. Somebody could do that. It's just you can't prove it.
You can't prove
Like
it. Yeah.
there's no way you can prove it happened. So like it's
Yeah, and Valet actually says that he's got documents demonstrating that the CIA did this, but that they're going to be released after he dies.
Is that part of his archive at Rice that he's got that like 10-year lock period on?
Yeah,
Rice? Like, I don't get that personally. I think that's stupid. Like, the lock up my files. Like, you don't even get them when I die. You got to wait till like a decade after I die to get them.
It's so that to partition the meta textual information. It's all part of a grand control system process.
He's hoping everyone's forgot about Trinity by then, and
yeah, isn't it strange that like Valet has long said that like the abduction or the crash narrative, recovery narrative is sort of bogus and it's a waste of time, and yet like he writes this book with this UFO fanatic about the exact same thing.
Right.
Yeah. Like I said, it's there's so much like contradictory stuff that even just comes out of like Valet. Like I said, he wrote that whole paper on 5 arguments about why extraterrestrial explanation is extremely unlikely. How it's unlikely that there's all these kind of physical landings and crafts happening. Like these abduction scenarios are unlikely, but then he just that they can manipulate space and time suggests that they're not extraterrestrial, like that they've existed throughout human history demonstrates that it's not a contemporary phenomenon. It's likely something else. Like he's got all these reasons why it's not, but then like you say, he goes and promotes a pretty goofy Trinity crash story hoax, and I'll tell you,
physical effects though.
Yeah. Well,
he argues for
art sample.
Effects. So he could pretty much argue anything, really, you know.
Yeah.
If you think about it.
Yeah. Well, you know, I had talked to Valet back 13, 14 years ago about the arts parts, the bismuth magnesium sample, and about like what it was, and he flat out told me it's just industrial slag, you know, the Betterton Kroll process for, you know, that it wasn't extraterrestrial. There's nothing remarkable about it. And then, you know, like 2017, everything happens, and it seems like he's back promoting the arts part sample as potentially being anomalous and having all these properties and all this other stuff. And it's like he went from, he goes in like these spurts where like he kind of backs away from ufology and kind of almost sounds more rational. And then he starts to embrace the woo again and gets back on the topic again, and now he's back promoting Trinity again. And I could forgive Trinity if he just had admitted he got it wrong and moved on, but he won't. Like he won't respond to questions. He like won't respond to the researchers. Like he won't. Like the way he's responded it to me, the way he's responded to the whole incident to me is the bad thing. Like it did demonstrate that he doesn't really do a whole lot of research and his technique is probably lacking. But I think more offensive is the way like he's handled the whole situation and has kind of doubled down on it and put out new editions of the book. And I don't know if they're still working on a movie or not. Like, I mean, it's like, as far as I'm concerned, Douglas Dean Johnson demolished that case. Like, there's no coming back from that. Like, it's rarely can you definitively debunk a case. Usually, you can just come up with the most plausible like explanation for it. Like, as far as I'm concerned, you pretty much definitively debunked the Trinity case. Like, it's extremely rare you can debunk something that thoroughly and definitively, but he did it. It's one of the most excellent, like, kind of deep dive breakdowns, and on a case that I've actually seen. It's pretty fantastic.
I wanted to share this little quote from Jules Evans introducing spiritual eugenics that I liked. He writes, at the very least, the belief that you and a handful of people like you are evolving into superhuman gods leads to an unpleasant sense of spiritual elitism, self-inflation, and contempt for those deemed unfit or less evolved. At worst, it can lead to ableism, disregard for the weak, sick, or vulnerable, racism or misogyny, and hierarchical dominator politics. I really liked that. There's a real danger of becoming, I think, I agree with Evans that there's a real danger of becoming really authoritarian or even fascist, in orienting yourself towards, this kind of new age, very anthropocentric, very, like elitist form of spirituality. And I just forgot what I was going to say.
I was talking to Rachel before the show. I was looking at that Starseeds article that Louise shared in the show, Starseeds, Nazis in Space. And it's a really great bibliography that he has within the article that I've actually read and shared too. Like, a lot of this stuff. They mentioned anthropologist Susanna Crockford, who, I guess, as far as like academics and starseeds goes, like, she's like the one. She's like she's a starseed expert. She's probably published more papers on it than anyone else. But they mentioned the really great UFO religion book by Christopher Partridge, which also has a great chapter on Jung and UFOs. It mentions this ET culture, anthropology, and outer space, which has a really great chapter I recommend by Christopher Roth on race and UFOs, and it also mentions this Mikhail Rothstein, Mahatmas in Space. I don't know if he's referring to a separate book, but Mikhail Rothstein has a chapter paper he wrote, Mahatmas on Space, that I believe was in the Handbook of UFO Religions. But I believe it was, or it could have been in this Handbook of Spiritualism Channeling, but I believe it's in the Handbook of UFO Religions. And I also recommend that paper, These Are They, ET Human Hybridization and the New Demonology by Robert Pearson Flattery. So this Evans guy clearly did his research, reading some really great papers, writing this article.
Who did that? Who put that up? Was that me somehow, accidentally?
Star Children.
I have that book.
Yes, I busted out the whole Louise reading library from his presentation. I've got the Making Contact book there, which unfortunately is edited by a not very good guy, a guy that's really into the Starseeds and the neo-Nazis, Alan Steinfeld. David Halperin's Intimate Alien book. Got that guy right there. He's got his A for Adamski Contactee book, which is a really cool book. It's a big book. It's got pictures of like Uri Geller here with Purak, how do we pronounce that guy's name, and all sorts of other guys in here. Yeah.
Most of those guys, or a huge, maybe a majority of them mentioned in that book, were somehow, in one way or another, linked to the Californian counterculture. Would you say that's true?
A lot of them, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, a good chunk of them.
There's definitely, a kind of crossover, I think, between spiritualism and West Coast counterculture for sure. And
Yeah.
sometimes that can be a good thing. Sometimes I think it's a bad thing.
I need a chicken coop like that.
I mean,
Good old
in my opinion. Like, I think that like describing a lot of these beliefs as being narcissistic is accurate, of, placing oneself in a special position, in relation to the cosmos, and other entities is, I think it's a very it really centers the self,
Yeah.
and yeah.
A
That
lot of
was
these guys also have a lot of far right and pretty, not very good views as well.
Mhm.
It's always the love and light folks that are the worst.
Yeah, that's what I find. But there's also a far left aspect, which is maybe less well known.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Adamski himself, he was like espousing the virtues of the Soviet Union, and he brought the FBI down on his head.
Yeah.
But I would say, like, overall, it's more of a, if we have to place it along the political spectrum, I think it's more of a towards the right, because it does at least imply kind of genetic predisposition or even a racialist aspect, where like certain groups of people are more attuned to like receiving this cosmic message, or being in tune with the aliens.
Yeah.
Mhm.
As well as I think it also tend to have just a lot more like kind of American exceptionalist, kind of like conservative traditional views, kind of as well, like traditional family. A lot of those other kind of. I think a lot of those people, like, they nowadays they would align more with like conservative Christians, but with New Age belief systems. Like, but as far as like their political leanings and like stuff like that went, but
Yeah.
yeah, some of them did absolutely kind of, appeal to like the Soviet Union and communism, and that did bring kind of attention
Mhm.
like onto them. But many of them, while supposedly kind of almost seeming to espouse those kind of beliefs, really quite didn't have those kind of beliefs. Like, they kind of like act like they're all love and light and about the people and the society and the world, but like deep down they really weren't. They were kind of bigoted and didn't
Mm-hmm.
people. Yeah.
Mhm.
Contactees are interesting. Contactees are an area that I still want to do a lot more study on, because it's an area that I kind of ignored for many years, like getting into this topic, because I've talked about before, I kind of always thought that stuff was all garbage and nonsense, and it wasn't worth really my time to look into it. And while it's not that I think there's any truth to the contactees, like, I do find benefit in studying them now and what they believed and kind of the environment they were in. And
Yeah.
my interests have expanded to where I'm interested in the woo, just not because I believe the woo. Yeah. So.
I wanted to say to Spank Flaps, who left a comment on one of our videos, that thank you for leaving that comment. They linked to a YouTube video that was, I think it was from Eyes on Cinema, that was like an Air Force documentary about basically talking about the Air Force investigations about Roswell in the early 90s, Project Mogul and Roswell Crash Case Closed, or that whatever that book is called, the popular book talking about Roswell that Air Force published in 1997, I believe.
Is that the second one or the first one?
That's the second one. So the first one was the Air Force report.
Yeah, the Roswell report, and then Roswell report is closed. The first one was
the first one was the big,
that one. The other one was like the smaller book. Yeah.
Yeah, there was the case closed one is like a big big book and it has like, case closed, like stamped, like a fake like stamp, like a rubber stamp or something, and really big print and stuff. I used to have that one.
Daddy, it's like a phone book. I believe that one's at my storage unit. I took a photo of it one of the times I was there.
Yeah, like I think that Spank Flaps left that comment because I kind of made it sound like, like that there was no real documentation that people had mistaken, Air Force technology for crash wreckage or something like that, the way that I put it. Because I think what I was talking about was really within the past like 7 years. I was referring to Luis's piece about oh yeah, that's right. I was referring to because Luis had raised this idea that maybe in the current post 2017 era, that's something that's happening. That crashed foreign drone technology and that kind of thing might be being recovered by the Air Force. People in the Air Force witnessing that but not knowing what it's about it could be going through that sort of same process as what happened during the 40s and 50s and 60s.
I absolutely think that's what's going on personally with probably most, if not all, of the people, for example, Grush has talked to that told him about these things. I think it's almost certainly people that had perhaps just specific compartmentalized information on a real foreign retrieval program, like recovering crashed foreign technology of some kind or foreign technology of some kind. They're given perhaps just like a piece of metal and told to analyze it because they don't need the whole crash. Like maybe they're metallurgists, they don't have the whole picture. They're just given a strange piece of metal, told it's from a crash that they recovered and they need it analyzed. That person, not knowing what it is, thinks, oh, it's extraterrestrial maybe. And they get in this idea that they're working on some sort of extraterrestrial recovery, and it's not. And as we saw, even in the ERA report, they did mention there was people that thought they were on programs, and it turned out they were not on UAP or retrieval programs. They're mistaking it for something else. So I think that's most likely what's going on is these people that think that they've had contact with these crash retrieval programs there may have been a real program. It just didn't actually have anything to do with extraterrestrial spacecraft that crashed. It was a foreign retrieval program, which, that's basically what Wright Pat was, is the foreign tech. That's what Blue Book was ran out of, the Foreign Technology Division, where they would get the MiGs and the other planes from like Russia and study them and analyze them. And like their whole deal was analyzing foreign technology. In the UFO community, just in the last year, people have talked about, they found that a report that talked about like a foreign like retrieval program or something that's between these different governments like Canada, the US, and like this agreement we have for retrieving foreign technology, and that there are teams that their job is to retrieve foreign technology like crashes and stuff so that we can analyze it and look at it. And those exist. And I think it's probably certain that some people are confusing those very real programs for alien programs, and they're not.
Yeah. Or it could just be that, they're being assigned to takeout retrieval, from Starbucks or something.
Yeah.
Go pick up some coffee for the employees at Right Pat. I'm sorry.
Yeah. And honestly, I think that might be one of the reasons why, like Gresh talks, that he has hostile witnesses that like don't want to talk to people. I think there's a good chance that some of the people he and others talked to told him things, but they weren't things they actually knew. They were just kind of like rumors or stories or stuff they believed, but they didn't actually have evidence for. And I think Gresh maybe perhaps took it too literally or too seriously and thought that they were confirming something to him. And then when he wants them to go testify, they're like, no, whoa, wait a second, bro. Like, I was just telling you like rumor mill stuff I heard around the water cooler. Like, I'm not going to testify to this because I don't actually have proof to any of this stuff. Like, I was just telling you like stories, man. Like, I think that
stop being hostile.
Yeah, I think that's also probably what's going on in some of these cases. Like, I'd be surprised if there's even one or two people that actually like literally directly claim to work on extraterrestrial craft, and if those people would, and if they'd even ever testify. Because again, right now everybody's playing the cop-out game where, oh, we don't trust Arrow, so we're not going to give him our definitive evidence of aliens. It's like, what?
Yeah, the ironic thing is that some of the UFO believers within the military or the IC, or at least according to Kirkpatrick, he says that they have told him outright that they're not going to help him because like he's part of the cover-up supposedly, which is ironic because like this office was set up specifically to investigate what the UFO people wanted the government to investigate.
Yeah, it's literally the office that, you know, they advocated to get set up to investigate claims like this. And now they're saying, you know, well, we don't trust him. Well, you know, if you actually had, if you could prove your story, if you could back up your claims with like documentation and evidence that you really worked on these programs, you shouldn't need to worry about being able to trust them or not. Like your evidence would stand for itself if you actually had it. Yeah. Like, but doing this allows them like, because then they go in, and the people that have gone in, like, well, they didn't like investigate or listen to anything I said, or it's like because some of these guys were literally just telling stories. Like, didn't they say like Robert Salas went in and talked to them or talked to Arrow or something? And it's like, well, what do you expect Arrow to do? Your event never actually happened, dude. Like, there's nothing to investigate. Like a lot of these people were just going and telling stories like that are unverifiable, like rumors that. And then they get mad and blame Arrow of cover-up because they didn't do anything with the information, the valuable information they gave them. It's like, yeah, maybe it's because it wasn't actually valuable, good information that you gave him. Like, you ever think about that? It's and don't get me wrong, like, I'm not like a big. I certainly think Arrow has plenty of flaws, like, and I think they could have done a far better job on the report. But you also got to understand that like Arrow doesn't have a huge staff. They don't have much of a budget, like, and they've had to waste all their time investigating sensational conspiracy theories instead of actually, I don't know, maybe looking at UFO cases. Like, you know, there's only so much they can do. So while I don't support Arrow per se, and like I'm not like some people accuse you of being like like a cheerleader for Arrow, or like, you know, just because you know point out certain things. But it's like, no, there's a lot of problems with Arrow. But as I pointed out with the report before, while they lacked historically, they did, you know, do a pretty good job kind of disputing some of the claims that have been being made publicly in the media over the last few years. And I think they did a pretty good job of that. But the truth is, people would never be satisfied. There's nothing Arrow that can do that would ever satisfy all these people, right? Like, no matter what they do, people are going to say there's a cover up. If they don't find evidence, well, it's because they covered it up. It has to be because it exists. We know it exists. So it's kind of they set themselves up in kind of a losing proposition to where they'll never be able to please the people that wanted them to get that office in the first place. Short of them coming out saying, yes, we found it. We found the aliens and the bodies. Like, it'll always just be a cover up.
Yeah, it's like they kind of like how do you expect to have disclosure if you don't even believe the government? Like like even if they did do disclosure, like you wouldn't believe it. Like,
but don't you know, you can believe the government as long as they're telling you what you want to hear. And it's the truth. But if it's what you don't want to hear, it's all lies.
Right. Okay.
You have to have discernment to be able to read that stuff, read between the lines to get what you want out of things.
Oh, I see Luis muted his mic because he's trying to prevent doggy disclosure. Trying to cover
they're spilling the beans.
What's that?
They're spilling the beans.
Whereas Dorothy's just over here sleeping.
Dorothy's part of the cover-up, but my dogs are part of the disclosure movement.
Well, she sleeps easy with that cover-up knowledge.
Do you think that she should be taken out to the back of a Humvee and stoned?
It's crazy that we've got organizations, platforming guys like throwing out violent rhetoric like that, like and organizations that are supposedly allegedly pushing for the scientific study of this stuff and for this to be taken seriously, and then you put a guy out there to keynote for you that has a history of violent rhetoric against people that are keeping the secrets. But not only that, when asked where a guy that supposedly has the secrets himself, like he knows where the spaceships are buried and he could provide disclosure on his own, but won't, and when asked why not, tells the UFO community to go F themselves. And this is the guy like that they put up as a keynote speaker. Like this is, yeah, it's a crazy community we're in.
Yeah. So, did you guys have anything to say about the Dusky Seaside Sparrow? Or the piece that I did in general, Kennedy Space Center.
Oh yeah.
I showed that one bird of that bird, the one that you said is stuffed, right? It was a stuffed bird.
Yeah, the imperial woodpecker.
Yeah, I showed that to a friend of mine the other day. He thought it was kind of cool looking.
I was thinking about the fact that there's a lot of Earth system science being done by satellites, or with satellites, but the launch sites could be problematic for local wildlife. So like at a global level, space program is good for the environment, apart from the emissions from the rockets, but I don't know how significant that really is in the grand scheme of things. But so like at a broader level, it is beneficial, but then at a smaller scale, I mean, where else could they have put it though? And would any other place have been not bad at all for, local wildlife? Like you'd have to put it like somewhere really barren or out
what
of the
if
way.
we put it where we've launched nukes, where we've done nukes before, places like Bikini Atoll, where they've cleaned it up, they dragged the sand, the top layer of the ground off, so it's fairly safe, and launch them out on islands like that. I mean, they already do launch a lot of rockets from isolated islands in the middle of the ocean. And isn't one of the things about Musk's rocket is that like it could take off from like a platform and then land again?
Right.
Like, wasn't there a video of one on a ship where it took off from like a ship? So there's other.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know if there's. Yeah, I don't know. I think personally, I feel like really we just need to like change everything, So it's like I can't give you an answer, I don't have a good solution to that. I think personally, what the US government should be spending their money on in terms of innovation and stuff like that. I don't think it should be focused on space science. I think it should be focused on preserving the natural environment. That's my view. I mean, I do think that space science is useful, and I'm really interested in space science, of course, because I always talk about it all the time. But I also think that, if we spent, the amount of money that NASA spends on space programs,
which is almost nothing. Like NASA's budget is non-existent, and it has been forever. Like they're so underfunded, it's ridiculous.
That's true. I mean, I don't know a lot about how much NASA spends. They probably spent a lot more money though during the 50s, 60s, and 70s, though, right? Like, hasn't their budget been like cut significantly or something like that?
Yeah, was it like the 90s or something? They started late 80s, 90s, started drastically cutting NASA's budget to almost nothing.
Yeah. So it used to be that they spent like a lot more money.
But the thing is like it's not just the idea that space science is just space is so flawed. Like what NASA and what they do isn't just for space. Like I just recently read something that talked about like how the space program was literally the largest and created the largest funding for pure scientific research, like in the history of the world. Like that, the vast majority of a lot of our pure scientific research can be traced back to the space program in the last 70, 80 years. Like, and so it's that I think that as far as dollar to payoff ratio has been exponential. Like there's few things we can spend money on that have had such the payoff as what we spent for NASA and the space program. I mean, quite literally everything we use in our daily life, we can trace back to the space program. So,
well, yeah, I don't know.
the idea that it's
I mean,
just space,
that's the thing is, it's like
space,
that's because it like. I mean, couldn't one argue that that's just because that's where all of that that funding and resources went into was the space program, and had it gone into
but it would have never gone into that stuff without it. And there's a lot of stuff we found just consequently from doing space research that had applications elsewhere. Like that's kind of what the whole NASA's like technology transfer department is, like, which that one UFO fraud guy used to work for, David Adair or whatever, is transferring stuff developed by the space program into the normal everyday world like the rest of us. And there's a lot of stuff that would have never been developed without the space program. Even if
I mean, I think I have two things to say to that. One is that, again, like, had you put the same amount of money and person power into different types of research, that would have also yielded the same amount of research, just in different directions. And two, I think a lot of the things that were ported, a lot of the tech that was ported from NASA isn't necessarily sustainable tech. If it's relying on plastics, if it's relying on rare minerals, if it's relying on industrial processes that produce.
Actually, NASA does some of the best renewable material research in the game, using renewable, recyclable, and other like green material science, as well as green chemistry research.
I mean, they might be calling it green, but I'm going to remain skeptical until I see that research specifically. I'm not saying that you're wrong or that you're lying. You could be making a valid point, but I doubt that that's real. I doubt that the kinds of research that NASA would be doing that's called green is actually as green as they claim it to be. I'm really skeptical about that, I think.
But we also needed the space program for our knowledge of physics and the universe, for things like GPS, which is critical for things like doing archaeology, precision, location work. Like all sorts of sciences depend on what's came out of the space program that just we wouldn't even have without the space program.
Yeah, climate science, geology,
satellite mapping, being able to
NASA,
look at
well,
all of this stuff we wouldn't even know about without the space program.
I'm not sure about that. I don't know about. I think that climate science doesn't really depend on space science very much. I mean, people are taking water and salinity, temperature and salinity measures.
No, but I mean, in terms of remote sensing, using satellites as remote sensors, that's incredibly powerful.
We wouldn't be able to build the models we do without that.
Okay, well, let's just agree to disagree, I guess. Because I don't think that. I mean, I think you guys are.
I mean, this is an old argument. People have been, like you said, been making it since the beginning of the space program. And there was a presentation I watched with Neil deGrasse Tyson once, where somebody basically asked him the same thing. It was some lecture he's giving to like, why are we wasting all this money on the space program? We got real problems here on Earth. Got homeless people that need food, et cetera, et cetera. And he made a really good point about how incredibly naive that was, and how they don't understand all the benefits the space program has actually benefited all these people.
Yeah,
and
but I mean, that's the thing, is that like, NASA's been around for a long time. And I mean, okay, granted, they have not spent most of their history specifically focused on climate science or specifically focused on poverty. but at the same rate, right, they haven't been focused on that. And even where you get really powerful scientific tools, right, like are those yielding results today? Can we say, oh well, this will, this technology here, lidar or whatever, GPS or something like that, this is going to lead down the road to a decrease in poverty, or this is going to lead down the road to a change in,
Yeah.
in global climate? I don't think that there's any reasonable way to argue that, like, not remotely. Like, we haven't seen any of those kinds of impacts.
Do you
because
know
of
what remote sensing is used for? Agricultural work, like lidar and satellite remote sensing and aerial remote sensing, and is used extensively to increase crop yields and be able to increase production of food products and to be able to know what to plant in certain areas. I mean, that's one of the main uses for it. In fact, one of the main uses of commercial drones is in agricultural work, doing multispectral sensing and lidar scanning and stuff of farm and crop field areas to optimize growing.
Yeah, but I mean,
And not just
agriculture
optimize, but in
is
the
like
most
really bad for the
legitimate.
environment. Like I mean, increasing crop yields is not
No,
necessarily
that's
a
not what
good
I mean.
thing.
I mean, in the growing the best crops in the most natural way in that environment in a
Mhm.
safe way. Like, you need these tools to be able to do that stuff. Otherwise, I mean, you can't just go back to like primitive subsistent methods and forget about technology and act like we can
Yeah,
do
and that's
everything without it. Like, all this stuff
yeah,
is critical to the
yeah.
future.
No, I'm not saying that we can just go back to pre-industrial times. That's not what I'm saying. But what I think is, what my personal view is that, you know we need to really be not focused on space so much. I think that scientists and researchers, what they need to be putting their resources into, what they need to be putting their interest into, like what their attention and what they're interested into is, how do we make the world a better place? And I think, like, prioritizing space research doesn't do that. I don't think we'll ever lead to that type of outcome. You know what I'm saying? I think that it will just be, a continuation of the types of technology that it's based on, the types of technology that it's looking for. Um, I just but like I said, we can agree to disagree, and that's my own personal point of view.
There's also the issue of the fact that Russia and China exist. And GPS is used for missile and bomb delivery.
Mm-hmm.
And NASA has actually been part of the U.S. military-industrial complex in that regard. Yeah. But I don't actually view that as a bad thing, because the Chinese and Russian military industrial complexes exist. This is like why the U.S., like some people say that the U.S. should unilaterally get rid of its nuclear weapons, and then so what? The world's going to be held hostage by Russia and China. This is just like the real world. There's things which are bad out there, and we can't just wish them away.
Did you listen to Sarah Skulls on EFR talk about this a couple of weeks ago? Because her new book is about nuclear.
Okay, yeah. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think nuclear weapons are terrible. They're a horrible evil in this world. But it doesn't mean that, for example, the U.S. should see itself as having some responsibility to get rid of them first. Because, like, frankly, I mean, who's going to want to live? Who wants to live under the CCP? I mean, truly in your heart, who would like choose that over living in America?
Well, I mean, I think that that's a pretty extreme scenario. I mean,
yeah, because nuclear weapons exist, and America has them.
Yeah, that's the thing. I think that's one of the things they kind of like brought up, and what you said you talked to people about, and I kind of agree with Louisa, is that that's the thing. Like, they already exist. Like yeah, I'm not a fan of nuclear weapons. I don't think we should ever use them. Like, it would be fantastic if we could get rid of all of them. That would be amazing. But the truth of the matter is, you can't. Period. Like, you'll never be able to. Like, they will always exist, And if other countries have them, then we at least need to have them as well. Like, I'm all for also reducing them. I don't think there needs to be as many nukes as there are in the world, but like, I think as unfortunate as it is, it's completely impractical and infeasible to the idea of getting rid of nukes, like, period. Like, it just won't happen. Like, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. And even if you could get rid of all the nukes that have been built, you can't get rid of the technology or somebody else just building another one.
Yeah, I mean, I think we can't probably get rid of nukes right now. I don't really know enough about that
Or
topic,
exploiting
to be
other
honest.
good technology.
But the thing is that, like, what I think that Russia and the US are basically complicit with each other. You know, it's not like we need to worry about fighting for democracy or something like that. That kind of rhetoric, and I know that you don't use this way, Luis, but a lot of the way that type of rhetoric is used is basically to bolster this myth of American exceptionalism. Basically, America does not need to be the top, and you know, it's not going to be the top forever. It just isn't. You know, and geopolitical wars and tensions between major superpowers, those are bad on all sides. That's the way that I see that. You know, like, I don't think that there's going to be some sort of dark future where we get taken over by a totalitarian government if we don't, you know, properly support the U.S. Nation or whatever. And, you know, like, I just don't see it that way. I'm sorry if I'm not explaining myself very well, but
that's what they want you to think while they secretly build it in the background.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, but you know, like, the U.S. is not. The U.S. does not have clean hands. The U.S. has lots and lots of blood on its hands, blood from its own citizens.
If you just wait for the U.S. to be perfect and have clean hands, and you can't get anything done.
And well, I'm not saying that we wait. You know, what I'm saying is that the way that U.S. does things is often bad, and we can't.
Yeah, but it's still an order of magnitude better than what Russia and China do. Like, again, like, at the end of the day, which hegemony would you rather live under, Chinese or American? Why is it that if people come to the U.S. instead of flocking to China? That's like the basic contours of it. I mean, we can discuss the details and bad things that America's done, but you know, at a broad level, there is like a real difference.
I mean, we can say, yeah, within America, the quality of the standard of living is generally better than in China, perhaps. But the fact of the matter is that America is a hegemony. And if we just consider, you know, that, oh, well, the quality of life of the 300 million people living here is more important than, you know, the, say, billion or so people who are affected by American politics in the world, you know, like, the way that Latin America is affected, or, you know, or the way that the Middle East is affected, you know, right? The way that Palestine is affected. Like, all of these places in the world and all of these people in the world are affected by American hegemony. And so it's not, I don't think that it's really an issue of being like either America or Russia or either America or China. It's really an issue of how can we make everyone's lives better in the world and make everything better in the world? You know, I think that we need to really stop thinking from a nationalistic standpoint and idealizing American democracy, you know. Hey, Campbell.
There's an economics guy, I think he was. I forget the guy's name, though. He talked about not really dividing countries up into this idea of, like, you know, like, people talk about first world, second world, third world, but it was more of an economic model of how like these countries feed into these countries, which are then like consumers, and then they feed into smaller countries, you know, but then they all that all ends up feeding back up to like the first level countries, you know, and like on the top you have like countries like the U.S., for example, or China, and like underneath, you've got these countries that like those countries depend on for like production, but also those other countries also kind of depend on these outside countries entirely for their consumption and all their other products and stuff. And that's why you get end up getting all these countries that in the past might have been called like third world or something. It's not like that there's a separate level. It's just that because of the economic structures in place, like they've become so dependent on other countries for everything, and other countries basically taking everything out of their countries. And I thought it was an interesting model. I wish I could remember the guy's name though, but
yeah, well, I definitely think that we can't really think about, you know, I don't think that it's possible to really think about things in terms of like our nation, you know, or and exclude the rest of the world. You know, nationalism is just not a useful thing, in my opinion, in the 21st century. And the only way that you can think about this stuff, whether ethically or unethically, is from a very global perspective, you know.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of I'm not a fan of nationalism, but I also don't I don't think there's anything special necessarily like about Americans, or like I think it's stupid when people put down other countries and are you a real American? Are you an American from elsewhere? I think the idea of like nationalism is just kind of like stupid in general. That being said, though, like you still live here, and like Luis says, it's better than other countries, and you have to. And as bad as the stuff America does and has done, and nobody's disputing America does a lot of horrible, crappy stuff. Like I've got no love for a lot of the stuff America does, but in comparison, is probably the lesser. I don't like to use the word evil, but you know what I mean. Like the lesser evil of the bunch.
But the other thing is that, do I have my I mean, nationalism. There's the kind of Trumpian isolationists. They are actually the nationalists. They want to disengage from the world. They're the ones who don't see
nationalists,
American responsibility, like say, to help Ukraine. Whereas, like, if the people on the liberal, let's call it the liberal establishment. I don't mean like liberal in the little L sense. I mean like maintaining the system of liberal democracy. They do see that there's a systemic issue there, that if we don't help Ukraine, then that makes the world safer for authoritarianism. And ultimately, it's better for America. There's more democracies in it. But that's kind of like an internationalist outlook more than a nationalist one.
Well, I think that's a good point. I do think that that there is less nationalism from that viewpoint, but I don't think it's nationalism free. It's not isolationist, but at the same time, though, I think that liberal democracy is not a perfect solution, right?
Yeah, but it's orders of magnitude better than Chinese authoritarianism. It's never going to be perfect. I think that Scandinavian democracy is better than American democracy.
Yeah. Right, but see now, once again, we're comparing different nations and how our nation is better than other nations, right?
Yeah, but in some ways, frankly, it is.
The thing is that like, if the liberal democracy is entirely dependent upon global capitalism, right? Or if that liberal democracy goes into countries like Nicaragua and like all of these other countries, and then covertly overthrows their governments and does these unethical things, or gets involved in these really huge, expensive proxy wars like the Vietnam War that many Americans have protested, right? Like
Milton Friedman.
Like, is there is liberal democracy worth all of that? My answer to that question is no, I think.
Well, then, if you don't think so, then there's no point fighting for it. So we might as well just let these people who are aligned with Russia, they don't want to protect, they don't want to help Ukraine, they don't want to help Taiwan, they just want to disengage we might as well just join them.
I don't think that's true. I mean, I'm not saying that we should just get rid. I'm not saying I'm not an anarchist. I'm not saying that we should just ignore all. Yeah. I mean, we live in a society, whatever. Like, so I'm not saying that I'm anti-America, right? I'm just saying that, like, I think socializing is good, and I mean, creating social welfare systems is really, really good, and a lot of liberal democracy doesn't support that. Sorry.
Yeah, but what other system?
Are you just confusing how certain countries implement so-called liberal democracies, like American neoliberalism, with what just the more generic idea? Because like none of that stuff is excluded from being a liberal democracy. You can have social welfare programs in a liberal democracy.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you're
I think
right.
you may be confusing like the American form of liberal with what liberal democracy actually means.
No,
things.
No,
like
I'm not saying I'm not.
liberals,
No,
they just
no,
don't.
I'm not confusing those things. I'm just saying that I think that I don't know. I'm sorry. I don't have the energy for this conversation, you guys. I'm sorry. But I guess I think my main point is really that, is that yes, totalitarianism is bad. Dictatorships are bad, but also the liberal democracy that we live in is entirely dependent upon global capitalism and global politics, and it would not exist if we were not exploiting other countries. And also this idea that America should go into other countries to institute liberal democracies or to overthrow communist governments, just because they think that liberal democracies are better or something like that, or that's going to whatever, it's completely unethical to do something like that. And it doesn't the ends aren't justified by that. So like I don't think it's an alternative between either extreme revolution or extreme, status quo, like just sustaining America versus complete anarchy. I accept that America exists, and I'm proud to be an American, right? But at the same rate, right, we need to change things radically if to avoid huge environmental and social disasters in the next century. And yeah,
that's true.
Yeah,
but I mean, what other system is going to give us a shot?
Yeah,
that's being
tried. I don't know.
I
personally, I don't think that the systems that we have now are going to work. But I think that there will be new systems in the future. Like if the human species survives, or if we, if we're to avoid this oncoming catastrophe, right, then we'll need to create new systems. We can't rely on liberal democracy. I don't think. I think that's. I mean, I think that it has its good things and good elements that are useful, but it was
so many different forms of political systems that you can have.
It's sort of like what Churchill said, that liberal democracy is the worst system, except for all the other ones that have been tried.
Yeah,
it's not that it's good; it's just that it's the least bad.
Yeah, but I don't think that I don't think it's going to be the solution, though.
Might not be.
I mean,
I just don't think anything else is going to be the solution that we currently have in the world. So it would have to be something genuinely new.
Yeah, well,
automated future luxury communism.
Oh yeah, that old chestnut.
Well, I think
asteroid mining will make us all so filthy rich we don't have to work.
I mean, I think that there's, I think that there are elements of things, that work, like socialist democracies, like I said, like Scandinavia, and when we have socialism in the U.S. that works really well, right? Like the New Deal had huge results. And I think that you have these like autonomous systems. Sometimes, like I think, I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean that's still that was still it was socialist to the extent that it was trying to make distribution of wealth more equal and have more social programs, but it was still capitalism. Like they weren't trying to get rid of capitalism.
Oh, no, I'm not saying that they were at all, but I am saying that they were, I'm not saying that a socialist democracy is really different from a liberal democracy that much, but I think
it is a liberal democracy.
Yeah, I mean,
but it's a social democratic liberal democracy.
Yeah,
is what you want. Yeah, I mean, I wish that the US was more like the Scandinavian democracies.
Mm-hmm.
Even though like there's problems there as well, that's probably also not enough.
Yeah, and I think Scandinavia also, they would not be successful if they were also not, dependent upon the global economy,
Yeah, but I mean, there's good and bad there as well. I mean, we just think in terms of like exploitation of the poor, but the truth is that millions of people around the world have been lifted out of poverty, and many countries are actually increasing their standard of living. It's also ironic that we kind of we want all these environmental policies, but then we talk about like how these other countries don't have as high a standard of living as we do, right? So like, what's the solution there if the consumption levels are the issue, but then we're complaining that these other countries don't have our consumption levels?
Well, I think, yeah, I mean, I guess that really just depends on what we mean by standard of living, because if standard of living means, if having a standard of living has to intrinsically mean living in a consumerist society, then we might as well just throw the whole idea of standard of living away, but if standard of living means, like having a home and having enough food for your family and like having healthcare, that kind of thing, I think that's more reasonable, but I mean, yeah, you're right though. There's like a tension there because a lot of what our standard of living really depends upon is mass production of products that are bad for the environment.
Yeah.
I think it's a really good point. But yeah, I didn't realize we were going to get so political, but this has been a good convo. This has been a good convo.
Yeah.
Is there anything else anyone would like to add?
Remember to call your dad and wish him Happy Father's Day if you haven't already. Yeah.
I have to upload the outro video.
Oh, and I did want to say, apparently I do have 2 patrons now. They subscribed like 2 months ago, and I just never got any notice for it. So I'd like to thank those the 2 of you that subscribed to my Patreon. Much appreciated.
Oh, awesome!
Nice.
Yeah, it's pretty cool.
Hold on, please. Continue talking amongst yourselves. Or continue being silent amongst yourselves. I totally just farted, you guys. Hey, everybody. Hey, world.
You woke Dorothy up. All right, guys.
All right. Thank you, Jeff. Thank you, Luis. This has been a wonderful conversation.
Thanks.
See you guys next time. Bye.
In the words of the disc, always eat before drinking from the saucer. I don't know. What was that?
Always eat the pancakes.
Always eat the pancakes. Never touch the saucer.
Leave the ice.